Aliens expected rescue. They got humanity's war armada. The Valkyrie research vessel Quiet Seeker drifted through the darkness of space like a wounded animal waiting to die. And Ambassador Kethrai stood at the center of the bridge watching his crew scramble in panic around him. They had been returning home from the Peace Summit when the Krix raiders appeared out of nowhere, and now their ship was crippled beyond repair. The engines were dead, the shields were failing, and 17 Krix warships surrounded them like predators circling prey. "Ambassador, we have lost all primary power to the weapon systems," reported his first officer, a young Valkyrie named Telis, whose violet skin had turned pale with fear. Kethri closed his 4 eyes and took a deep breath to calm himself. He had served his people for over 60 cycles and had faced many dangers. But this was different because the Krix were not soldiers or warriors. They were slavers who sold living beings in the darkest markets of the galaxy. "Send out a distress signal on all frequencies," he commanded, keeping his voice steady even though fear gripped his hearts. "Include the human communication bands as well." Teles looked at him with confusion. "The humans, Ambassador. They are a young species with limited resources, and they have no treaty with our people." "Send it anyway," Kethray replied. "At this moment we need anyone who will listen." The distress signal went out into the void, carrying with it a desperate plea for help that traveled across the stars at the speed of light. It spoke of their location, their situation, and it mentioned one critical detail, that an ambassador of the Valkyrie Collective was aboard the vessel. Meanwhile, the Krix warships moved closer, and their leader, War Master Vral, opened a communication channel to gloat over his prize. "Little Valkyrie," Vral hissed through the screen, his reptilian face twisted into what passed for a smile among his kind. "You have wandered far from your protected space, and now you belong to the Krix." Kethri stepped forward to face the monster on the screen. "We are a diplomatic vessel protected by galactic law, and attacking us is an act of war against the Collective." Vral laughed, and it was an ugly sound that made the Valkyrie crew shudder. "Your Collective is far away, little prey, and out here in the outer reaches, there is no law except the law of the strong, and I am strong while you are weak. What do you want from us?" Kethri asked, though he already knew the terrible answer. "Your crew will fetch a fine price in the slave markets," Vral explained with cruel pleasure. "But you, Ambassador, will be my personal trophy because important prisoners are worth more than common slaves." The communication ended, and Kethri turned to see his crew looking at him with desperate hope in their eyes. They believed he would save them somehow, but he had no miracles to offer, only prayers to ancient gods who seemed very far away. 10,000 light years from the dying Valkyrie ship, a human listening station called Vigil 7 floated in the endless black. And inside that station, a young woman named Lieutenant Sarah Chun sat at her console monitoring the endless chatter of the cosmos. She was tired because her shift had been long and uneventful, and she was thinking about the coffee waiting for her in the break room when something made her sit up straight, a distress signal unlike any she had heard before. "Computer, translate and analyze," she commanded, and within seconds the message appeared on her screen in clear text. Sarah read the words carefully. "A Valkyrie diplomatic vessel under attack by Krix raiders. 17 enemy ships, weapons disabled, shields failing," and then she saw the words that changed everything. "Ambassador aboard." Her training took over instantly because every human officer knew what those words meant. An ambassador represented their entire species, and allowing harm to come to any ambassador, regardless of species, was unthinkable to humanity. Sarah did not call her superior officer to ask for permission. She did not file a report or request guidance from command. She simply reached for the red switch on her console that she had hoped never to use and pressed it without hesitation. The red protocol activated. Across 17 star systems, encrypted signals burst forth from Vigil 7, and reached every human military vessel within range. On each ship, alarms began to sound, and officers rushed to their stations, wondering what emergency could trigger such an extreme response. Admiral James Okonkwo was eating dinner aboard the dreadnought Unconquered Sun when the call reached him. And he dropped his fork immediately when he heard the code phrase that every human commander dreaded and prepared for in equal measure. Red Protocol confirmed. His communications officer reported, "A diplomatic vessel is under attack in the outer reaches, and an ambassador is aboard." Okonkwo rose from his seat with calm determination on his face. He was a tall man with dark skin and gray hair, and he had served humanity for 40 years through wars both terrible and necessary. "Set course immediately," he ordered. "Contact all ships in range and tell them to converge on these coordinates. This is not a drill." One by one, human warships across the sector received the call and responded. Dreadnoughts changed course. Battlecruisers powered up their weapons. Destroyers formed into attack groups, and two massive Extinction-class carrier ships that humanity had kept secret from the rest of the galaxy emerged from their hidden bases. Lieutenant Chen watched her display fill with friendly signatures and felt pride swell in her chest. This was what humanity did when innocent lives were threatened, and this was why she had joined the fleet. She opened a channel to the distant Valkyrie ship, hoping they could still receive transmissions. Valkyrie vessel Quiet Seeker. This is Terran listening station Vigil 7. Hold on, because help is coming. Far away, aboard the crippled ship, a young Valkyrie engineer named Sorrel picked up the transmission on his damaged equipment. He ran to Ambassador Kethray with confusion and hope mixing in his voice. "Ambassador, I received a human transmission," Sorrel reported. "They say help is coming. But what can the humans possibly send that would matter against 17 Krix warships?" Kethray had no answer because he knew almost nothing about the young species called humanity. They had only recently joined the galactic community and were considered primitive by most standards. Surely they could not help against such overwhelming odds. But as the first Krix boarding craft launched toward the Quiet Seeker, something strange began happening on Sorrel's sensors. Massive energy signatures were appearing at the edge of the system, more signatures than he had ever seen in one place. "Ambassador," Sorrel whispered with shock clear in his voice. "Something is coming, something impossible." Aliens expected rescue. They got humanity's war Armada Commander Yuki. Tanaka stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Rising Thunder and watched her tactical display with growing amazement as more and more friendly signatures appeared from every direction. She had served in the human fleet for 15 years and had participated in many operations, but she had never seen anything like this response. It seemed like every warship in the sector was converging on a single point in space. "Commander, we have confirmation from Fleet Command," her tactical officer reported. "Admiral Okonkwo has assumed overall command of the response force, and our orders are to join Formation Delta at the following coordinates." Tanaka nodded and studied the numbers appearing on her screen. 3 dreadnoughts, including the mighty Unconquered Sun, 12 battlecruisers like her own vessel, 47 destroyers, over 200 support craft, and she had to read the entry twice to believe it, 2 Extinction-class carriers. "The Extinction-class ships are real?" she asked with surprise, because most officers believed those vessels were just rumors and propaganda. "Very real, Commander," her tactical officer confirmed. "The carriers Hammer of Dawn and Silent Fury are both en route with full combat wings." Tanaka felt a chill run down her spine because she understood what this meant. Humanity was not sending a rescue mission. They were sending a war fleet capable of destroying entire civilizations. Meanwhile, aboard the crippled Quiet Seeker, Ambassador Kethray attempted one final negotiation with War Master Vral as the Krix boarding craft drew closer to his vessel. "War Master, I offer you everything of value on this ship. Kethri pleaded through the communication channel. Scientific data, star charts, medical technology. Take it all and let my crew go free. Vral's laughter echoed through the bridge, and every Velthari present felt their hope die a little more. You do not understand, little prey, the Krix commander explained with cruel amusement. I do not want your data or your technology because those things have no value compared to living slaves. Your crew will work in the mines until they die, and you will serve me until I grow bored. There must be something you want, Kethri insisted. Name your price. My price is your suffering, Vral answered. In 1 hour my soldiers will board your ship, and then you will understand what it means to be Krix property. Enjoy your last moments of freedom, Ambassador. The communication ended, and Kethri stood in silence as his crew looked to him for guidance he could not provide. He was a diplomat who had spent his life resolving conflicts with words, but there were no words that could stop what was coming. Young Sorrel approached him with a scanner in his hands and confusion written across his features. Ambassador, the energy signatures I detected are growing stronger, and I count hundreds of individual sources converging on our location. More Krix? Asked First Officer Telis with despair in her voice. I do not think so, Sorrel replied. The energy patterns are different from any Krix technology I have ever seen. They are more powerful and more advanced than anything in our databases. Kethri felt something strange stir in his chest. Could it be hope, or was he simply too tired to accept the inevitable? Can you identify the source? He asked. Sorrel worked his controls frantically, trying to compensate for the damage to his sensors. The signatures matched the human communication frequencies we received earlier, but that cannot be correct because these readings suggest a military force larger than anything the humans should possess. Far away in slipspace, Admiral Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the unconquered sun and reviewed everything humanity knew about the Krix. They were slavers and raiders who preyed on the weak, and they had terrorized the outer reaches for centuries. The Krix have never faced a determined opposition, his intelligence officer reported. They attack isolated vessels and undefended colonies, but they retreat whenever they encounter equal force. Then they have never faced humanity, Okonkwo replied calmly. What is our current fleet strength? All ships have confirmed their positions. Admiral, we will arrive at the target coordinates in approximately 20 minutes with full combat readiness. Okonkwo nodded and opened a channel to all ships in the fleet. His voice carried across thousands of kilometers of metal and machinery, reaching every sailor and soldier under his command. This is Admiral Okonkwo, he began. In 20 minutes, we will drop out of slipspace into hostile territory, where a diplomatic vessel is under attack by Krix raiders. There is an ambassador aboard that vessel, and our mission is simple. No Krix ship leaves that system alive. Across the fleet, men and women checked their weapons and said quiet prayers. They knew what they were being asked to do, and they accepted it without hesitation because this was what humanity had trained for. This was why they existed. Commander Tanaka listened to the Admiral's words and felt her resolve harden like steel. The Krix were about to learn why humanity had survived so many wars, why they had crawled up from the mud of a single planet and reached for the stars. All stations report battle ready, she ordered. Load all weapons and prepare for immediate combat upon exit from slipspace. Back aboard the Quiet Seeker, the Krix boarding craft were now only minutes away, and War Master Vral watched from his flagship with satisfaction as his prize drew closer. Prepare the slave restraints, he ordered his crew. I want the Velthari ambassador brought to me in chains. His tactical officer suddenly called out with alarm. War Master, I am detecting massive slipspace distortions at the edge of the system. More Krix clans coming to share our prize? Vral asked with annoyance because he did not want to divide his spoils. Negative, War Master, the officer replied with growing fear in his voice. The signatures do not match any known Krix vessels. I count over 300 individual ships. Vral felt something he had not experienced in many years. Uncertainty. Identify them. I cannot, War Master, wait. They are exiting slipspace now. On the bridge of the Quiet Seeker, Sorrel stared at his sensor display as reality seemed to twist and tear. Hundreds of exit signatures bloomed across the darkness like flowers of light and fury. Ambassador, he whispered with awe and terror mixing in his voice. They are here, whoever they are. They are here. Cathray moved to the observation window and looked out into space, and what he saw made his four eyes widen beyond their natural limits. Ship after ship emerged from slipspace, warships of terrifying size and obvious power, each one bearing the same emblem, a blue and green planet surrounded by stars. The humans, he breathed, unable to believe what he was witnessing. They actually came. But even as hope filled his heart, a darker question formed in his mind. What kind of species sends a war armada to rescue strangers they have never met? Aliens expected rescue. They got humanity's war armada. The human armada emerged from slipspace in perfect formation, and the sight of it made War Master Vral freeze in disbelief on the bridge of his flagship. He had commanded Krix raiders for 60 years and had never seen anything like the wall of metal and weapons that now faced him. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons hung in space alongside sleek battlecruisers and swift destroyers, and behind them all loomed two carriers so massive that they blocked out the stars. How many ships? Vral demanded, his voice cracking with the first fear he had felt in decades. 347 confirmed vessels, War Master, his tactical officer replied in a trembling voice. Their weapons are powered and targeting our fleet. Vral tried to understand what was happening. The humans were supposed to be a young and weak species with primitive technology. How could they possess such overwhelming military force? Before he could process this new reality, a communication channel opened, and a human face appeared on every screen in the Krix fleet. It was Admiral James Okonkwo, and his expression was calm and cold as deep space. This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the Terran Combined Fleet, the human announced in a voice that carried absolute authority. You have threatened a diplomatic vessel under humanity's protection, and you will power down your weapons, release your boarding craft, and surrender unconditionally. You have 60 seconds, and there will be no second warning. The bridge of Vral's flagship went silent as every Krix present processed the ultimatum. Surrender was unknown in their culture because the Krix took what they wanted and crushed anyone who resisted. Vral felt rage replace his fear. How dare these humans threaten him? And how dare they demand the surrender of a Krix war master? You think you can frighten me with numbers, human? Vral snarled back through the communication channel. The Krix have never surrendered. And we will not start today, all ships. Attack. 15 Krix warships surged forward with weapons blazing, and Vral watched with savage satisfaction. His vessels were powerful and battle-tested, and surely they would destroy at least some of these arrogant humans. What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. The first human volley crossed the distance between the fleets in less than a heartbeat, and Vral watched in horror as 3 of his warships simply ceased to exist. There were no explosions or debris, just empty space where mighty Krix vessels had been moments before. Impossible, he whispered as more human weapons found their targets. On the bridge of the unconquered sun, Admiral Okonkwo watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Target their engines first. I want no survivors escaping to warn others. Aye, Admiral, his weapons officer responded, and the orders went out to the fleet. Human weapons technology, kept carefully hidden from galactic observers for decades, now revealed itself in all its terrible glory. Railguns fired tungsten rounds at fractions of light speed. Plasma lances burned through Krix shields like they were made of paper. and missile swarms overwhelmed point defense systems with sheer numbers. Commander Tanaka, aboard the Rising Thunder, directed her ship's fire with cold precision. Target the vessel on bearing 7-3, concentrate fire on their reactor core. The Crick ship she targeted lasted exactly 4 seconds before its reactor detonated in a brilliant flash of released energy. Aboard the Quiet Seeker, Ambassador HFY watched the destruction through the observation window and felt his legs grow weak beneath him. He had studied military history and had seen recordings of great battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. The Cricks were warriors who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, and the humans were destroying them with casual efficiency. Ship after ship died in fire and silence, and the humans had not lost a single vessel. "This is not war," young Sorrel said in a voice filled with awe and fear. "This is slaughter." HFY could only nod, because no words seemed adequate to describe what he was witnessing. On the Crick's flagship, War Master Vral screamed orders that no one could follow. His fleet was dying around him, and nothing he did made any difference. "All ships retreat," he finally commanded, abandoning his pride in the face of annihilation. "Fall back to slipspace. We must escape." But the humans had anticipated this response. Admiral Okonko had positioned his destroyers in a net around the battlefield, and any Crick ship that tried to flee found itself cut off and destroyed. "No Crick's vessel leaves this system," the Admiral repeated his earlier order. "Hunt them down." One by one, the remaining Crick ships died. Some tried to fight, some tried to run, and some simply drifted as their crews abandoned hope. All of them met the same fate. Vral's flagship, the Endless Hunger, made a desperate attempt to punch through the human formation. It accelerated to maximum speed and fired every weapon it possessed at the nearest human vessel. The human destroyer took several hits, and its shields flickered under the assault. For a moment, it seemed like Vral might escape. Then the dreadnought Unconquered Sun turned its main guns toward the fleeing flagship, and Admiral Okonko gave a single command: "End him!" The Endless Hunger died in a storm of fire that lit up the darkness like a new sun, and War Master Vral had exactly 3 seconds to realize that he had made the worst mistake of his long and brutal life. Escape pods launched from the dying vessel, carrying Crick survivors who would spend the rest of their lives as prisoners, a fitting fate for those who had enslaved so many others. When the last Crick's weapon fell silent, Admiral Okonko surveyed the battlefield. 15 enemy warships reduced to debris in less than 10 minutes, and not a single human vessel lost. "Signal the Valkyrie vessel," he ordered. "Tell them the threat has been eliminated, and that we are sending medical and repair teams immediately." As human shuttles launched toward the Quiet Seeker, HFY stood at the observation window and tried to process what he had witnessed. The beings who had just destroyed an entire Crick's fleet were now sending doctors and engineers to help his wounded crew. "What are they?" First Officer Telis asked in a voice barely above a whisper. HFY had no answer because everything he thought he knew about the galaxy had just been proven wrong. The humans were not a young and primitive species. They were something far more terrifying and far more wonderful than anyone had imagined. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a question formed that would haunt him for years to come. Why had humanity hidden their true strength from the rest of the galaxy? Aliens expected rescue. They got humanity's war armada, the first human shuttle docked with the Quiet Seeker, and Ambassador HFY waited at the airlock with his surviving crew, uncertain what to expect from the beings who had just annihilated an entire Crick's fleet. When the airlock opened, human soldiers stepped through in combat armor that looked heavy and intimidating. They carried weapons that HFY could not identify, and their faces were hidden behind dark visors. But then the lead soldier removed her helmet, revealing a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Ambassador HFY? I am Sergeant Maria Santos, and we are here to help. Is anyone injured?" The contrast between her gentle voice and the devastating violence Kethray had just witnessed made his head spin. "Yes, we have many wounded, and our medical supplies are almost gone." "No problem, sir," the sergeant replied. "We have medics and supplies for everyone. Just show us where your people need help." More humans poured through the airlock, and Kethray noticed that half of them carried medical equipment instead of weapons. They spread through the ship with efficiency and purpose, treating wounded Velthary with gentle hands and soft words. Young Sorrel had been injured during the Krix attack, and now a human medic named Corporal David Reyes knelt beside him, carefully treating his wounds with alien medicine that somehow worked perfectly on Velthary biology. "You are going to be fine," Reyes assured him with a friendly grin. "This might sting a little, but you will feel much better in a few hours." Sorrel watched the human work and felt compelled to ask a question. "Why did you come to save us?" "We are not your allies, and we have never done anything for your species." Reyes paused and looked at the young Velthary with what seemed like genuine confusion. "You sent a distress call. What else were we supposed to do?" "But you sent hundreds of warships," Sorrel pressed. "You sent an entire armada for strangers." The medic shrugged as if the answer was obvious. An ambassador was in danger, and that matters. It does not matter which species the ambassador represents, because some things are just right, and some things are just wrong. And leaving innocent people to suffer is wrong. Before Sorrel could respond, Reyes pulled out a small device and showed him an image. It displayed a human child with dark hair and bright eyes, smiling at the camera with pure joy. "That is my daughter," the medic explained proudly. "Her name is Elena, and she is 7 years old. When I tell her stories about my work, I want to tell her that her father helped people who needed help, not that he stood by while others suffered." Sorrel felt something shift in his understanding of these strange beings. They were not simply warriors or conquerors. They were people with families and values and dreams. Meanwhile, Admiral Okonkwo had personally shuttled to the Quiet Seeker to meet Ambassador Kethray. The two leaders faced each other in what remained of the ship's conference room, surrounded by the evidence of battle and survival. "Admiral, on behalf of the Velthary Collective, I thank you for our lives." Kethray began formally. "Please tell me what compensation you require for this service." Okonkwo's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Compensation? Ambassador, we did not come here for payment. But surely you expect something in return," Kethray insisted. "Military alliances, trade agreements, political support. What do your people want from mine?" The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Kethray listen carefully. "Ambassador, you sent a distress call into the darkness, hoping that someone would hear and someone would care. Where I come from, that means something," Okonkwo explained. "You asked for help, and we answered because that is what humans do." "But we are strangers," Kethray protested, still struggling to understand. "We have no treaty with your people, and we have never offered you friendship or support." Okonkwo smiled, and it was a sad smile that spoke of old pain and hard-won wisdom. "Let me tell you something about humanity. Ambassador, we spent most of our history fighting each other, and we nearly destroyed our own world through war and hatred and stupidity." He moved to the window and looked out at the debris field that had once been a Krix fleet. "We learned from those mistakes, and we made a promise to ourselves. Never again would we stand idle while innocents suffered, and never again would we use our strength only for ourselves." "So you built this armada to protect others?" Kethray asked. "We built this armada because we know what we are capable of," Okonkwo admitted. "We know the darkness that lives in human hearts, and we know that power without purpose is just destruction waiting to happen. So we gave ourselves a purpose." He turned back to face the ambassador. "When someone calls for help, we answer. It does not matter who they are or where they come from, because every sentient, Being deserves a chance to live and grow and find their own path. Kethri felt his understanding of the galaxy shift in ways he could not fully express. He had met many species in his long career, and most of them operated on calculations of benefit and cost, advantage and disadvantage, but these humans seemed to operate on something entirely different. "What do you call this principle?" he asked. Okonkwo thought for a moment before answering. "Some of us call it honor, and some call it duty, but I think the best word is simply compassion. Ambassador, because the galaxy is vast and cold and dangerous. And the only way any of us survive is by looking out for each other." As if to prove his point, a human engineer entered the conference room to report that temporary repairs to the Quiet Seeker's engines were complete. The vessel could now limp to the nearest starbase for full restoration. "Admiral, we are also detecting other ships approaching the system," the engineer added. "They are identifying themselves as Valkyrie rescue vessels." Okonkwo nodded with satisfaction. "Good coordinate with them and make sure the transfer goes smoothly." He extended his hand to Kethri in what the ambassador now recognized as a human gesture of friendship and respect. "Safe travels, Ambassador, and if you ever need help again, you know how to reach us." Kethri took the offered hand and felt something profound pass between them. "Admiral, I believe my people have much to learn from yours. Perhaps this is the beginning of something important." "Perhaps it is," Okonkwo agreed. "But for now, just get your people home safely. That is all that matters." As the Admiral departed, Kethri passed a human soldier in the corridor. She was cleaning her weapon with practiced efficiency, but when she noticed him watching, she looked up and smiled with genuine warmth. "Stay safe, Ambassador," she said kindly before returning to her work. And Kethri realized something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. The humans had just destroyed an entire fleet without mercy. And now they smiled and offered kindness, as if the violence had been nothing more than a brief interruption in their day. What kind of species could switch so easily between destruction and compassion? The answer, he suspected, would change the galaxy forever. Aliens expected rescue. They got humanity's war Armada. 3 months had passed since the destruction of the Krik's fleet, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Ambassador Kethri stood before the Galactic Council in the Great Assembly Hall on Neutral Station Concordia, facing representatives from over 200 species who had gathered to hear his testimony about the human intervention. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "You have all seen the battle recordings, and you all know the military facts. 300 human warships destroyed 17 Krik's raiders in less than 10 minutes without suffering a single loss." Murmurs rippled through the assembly because those numbers still seemed impossible to many who heard them. "But I am not here to discuss weapons or tactics," Kethri continued. "I am here to tell you about what happened after the battle, about the humans who treated our wounded with gentle hands, about the Admiral who wanted nothing in return for saving our lives, and about a medic who showed me pictures of his daughter while explaining why humans answer distress calls." He paused to let his words sink in before delivering his conclusion. "The humans are not what we feared. They are what we hoped for but never believed could exist." Across the galaxy, the aftermath of the battle continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The Krik's empire, built on centuries of raiding and slavery, collapsed within weeks of the confrontation. Other raider species watched the battle recordings and understood that their way of life was no longer sustainable. The humans would not tolerate such cruelty, and the humans had the power to enforce their values. Slave markets that had operated openly for generations suddenly closed their doors, and countless beings who had lived in chains found themselves unexpectedly free. In the outer reaches, settlements that had cowered in fear for centuries began to emerge and grow. Trade routes that had been too dangerous to travel became highways of commerce and cultural exchange. And through it all, human warships patrolled the spaceways, asking nothing and demanding nothing, simply present, simply watching, simply ready. Young Sorrel, fully healed from his injuries, made a decision that surprised his family and friends. He applied for a position as a cultural liaison to humanity. And when asked why, he explained with passion that moved everyone who heard him. "I met them at their worst and their best," he told the selection committee. "I saw them destroy an entire fleet without hesitation. And then I watched them weep for the lives they had taken. They are not monsters. And they are not angels. They are something new, something the galaxy has never seen before. And I want to understand them." His application was approved, and Sorrel became one of the first Velthari to live among humans on their homeworld. Earth amazed him from the moment he arrived. It was a planet of stunning beauty and terrible scars, covered with forests and deserts and oceans and cities that reached toward the sky. He learned that humans had nearly destroyed this world through war and pollution, and that they had pulled themselves back from the brink through sheer determination and shared sacrifice. He met children who dreamed of exploring the stars and elders who remembered when their species had been alone in the universe. He ate their food and listened to their music and watched their art. And through it all, he saw the same pattern repeating, a species that knew darkness intimately and chose light anyway. "You have so much power," he said to Corporal Reyes during one of their many conversations. "You could conquer the galaxy if you wanted to. Why do you not?" Reyes laughed and shook his head. "We tried conquering things, Sorrel. We tried it many times throughout our history, and it never worked out well for anyone. So you choose protection instead of domination." "We choose to be useful," Reyes corrected him. "There is a difference between being feared and being needed. And we have decided that we would rather be needed." A delegation of 12 species arrived at Earth, requesting formal alliances with humanity. They came expecting to negotiate from positions of fear, prepared to offer tribute and submission in exchange for protection. Instead, they found humans who were eager for friendship and desperate to prove that they were more than their weapons. Trade agreements were signed based on mutual benefit, and cultural exchanges were established to help species understand each other better. Admiral Okonkwo retired from active service and moved to a small house by the sea where he could watch the waves and remember all the battles he had fought. When journalists came to interview him about his legacy, he always gave the same answer: "I just answered a call for help. Any human would have done the same." And the universe continued to spin, and new challenges continued to arise. And somewhere on the far edge of the galaxy, a young species called the Telkari faced their own moment of crisis. They were peaceful beings who had never developed weapons of war. And now an aggressive neighbor called the Varex Collective demanded their surrender and enslavement. The Telkari had no fleet, no army, no hope of resistance. All they had was a transmission system capable of reaching distant stars. Their leader, a tired and frightened being named Elder Koshal, gathered his council and asked a question that would determine the fate of their entire species. "Is there anyone in the galaxy who might help us?" One of his advisors stepped forward with information gleaned from galactic news feeds. "There are stories. Elder stories in a species called humanity, who answered a distress call from strangers and destroyed their enemies without asking for payment or alliance." "Stories and legends," another advisor dismissed. "We cannot base our survival on fairy tales." But Elder Koshal felt something stir in his heart's hope. Perhaps, or desperation dressed as courage. "Send the message," he commanded. "Send it on every frequency and in every language. Tell them who we are and what we face, and pray that someone is listening." The distress call went out into the darkness, traveling across light years of empty space, carrying the desperate plea of a peaceful species facing extinction. And 10,000 light-years away on a listening station called Vigil 12, a young human officer named Lieutenant James Chun looked up from his console as an alert flashed on his screen. He read the message carefully, noting the desperation in every word and the fear behind every plea. Then he smiled a smile that would have terrified the Varaks if they could have seen it. "Distress signal received," he announced to his commanding officer. "A species called the Telkari is requesting assistance." His commander nodded and reached for the communication controls. "Contact Fleet Command and activate standard response protocols. It looks like we have work to do." Across 17 star systems, human warships changed course and began converging on a single set of coordinates. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Telkari waited and prayed and hoped, not knowing that their prayers had been answered, not knowing that help was coming, not knowing that the galaxy had changed and that no species would ever have to face extinction alone again. Because humanity was watching, because humanity was listening, and because when innocence called for help, humanity would always answer.